There are days when everything you thought you knew about someone gets stripped away in an instant. One moment, you're sitting in a room with the person you thought you knew better than anyone in the world, and the next moment, you realize you don't know them at all. That's how it started for me. Like a slow burn, a crack in the foundation of a life I thought was unbreakable. It didn't come in the form of a dramatic confrontation or a shocking revelation. No, it started quietly, with something as simple as a text message. I hadn't planned to check her phone. I wasn't the kind of guy who pried into other people's privacy. But there was something about her lately, something subtle, almost imperceptible, that had me on edge. Amelia had changed. I could see it in the way she looked at me, the way she held back from laughing at my jokes, the way she'd smile, but never really meet my eyes anymore. It was as if we were both floating in the same space, but we were no longer connected. For weeks, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was probably just work stress, or maybe she needed some time to herself. I'd grown so used to being a passive observer in our marriage, just going with the flow, not questioning things, assuming everything was fine. But my instincts, the part of me that had been silent for so long, had started to whisper that something wasn't right. It was a Tuesday night when it happened. She had stepped into the bathroom, and for some reason, I found myself glancing at her phone, which had been left unattended on the kitchen counter. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe it was the silence that filled the room, or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't felt truly close to her in weeks. Whatever the reason, something in me shifted, and I found myself picking up her phone. The screen was unlocked. I could have put it down right there. I could have walked away and told myself it was none of my business. But instead, I unlocked the messages. Just a peek, I thought, just to see what she'd been up to. There were only a few messages, but the last one made my blood run cold. I miss you. I think about you every night. My first thought was, who is this? I scrolled up, and the messages before it hit me harder than I was ready for. There was nothing blatant, nothing that screamed betrayal, but the tone. It was different. Casual. Intimate. They spoke like two people who had shared something far deeper than just a friendship. I froze, the weight of the moment pressing on me. My heart pounded as I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe it's just a friend, I thought. Maybe it's harmless. But that voice inside me, the voice I had ignored for months, was screaming that I wasn't wrong. This wasn't nothing. I quickly put the phone back, but the damage had been done. I could feel it now, deep in my chest, a growing sense of dread. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. She came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, as if nothing had happened. She smiled, asked if I was hungry, and went to the kitchen to start dinner. But something had shifted. I could see it in the way I looked at her now, in the way the words I had read echoed in my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, the images of those messages replaying in my head over and over again. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. I tried to tell myself I had no right to feel this way, to question her. But the truth was undeniable. There was more to it, something she wasn't telling me. And that gnawing feeling, that sense of loss and confusion, grew stronger with every minute I laid awake in the dark. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to shout and demand answers. But as I lay there, the realization hit me. I couldn't do that. Not yet. Not until I had the full picture. Because if I confronted her now, I knew it would all come crashing down. But if I kept quiet, if I observed just a little longer, I might uncover something even darker. I had no idea that by the time I'd gather enough courage to ask the right questions, everything would have already changed. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or if I had just uncovered something that could shatter everything. I couldn't stop thinking about those texts, the intimacy in them, the way they seemed to come from someone who knew her in a way I didn't. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. Amelia continued acting like everything was normal. She was still the same person on the surface, the woman who made me laugh, who still cooked dinner most nights, who smiled at me like she used to. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at her through a veil now. There was something she wasn't telling me. I could feel it, just beneath the surface. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. It felt like the ground beneath me had become unstable, and if I moved too quickly, it might all fall apart. So I stayed quiet, watching, observing her every move. But the more I watched, the more I saw things I didn't like. There were the late nights, the extra phone calls, the time she would go out with friends I didn't recognize. Each time she left, I couldn't help but wonder, was she really with them? Or was she meeting someone else? One evening, I came home early from work, expecting to catch her in one of her usual routines, making dinner, working on her laptop, or reading a book. But as soon as I walked through the door, something felt off. The house was eerily quiet, no sounds of music or the clinking of dishes. I went upstairs, expecting to find her in our room, but she wasn't there. I checked the bathroom, the living room, even the garage, but she was nowhere to be found. I sent her a text, asking if she was okay. A few minutes later, she called me back. "Hey, babe, I just went out to meet a friend," she said, her voice sounding perfectly casual. I paused. "A friend? You didn't tell me you were going anywhere." She hesitated for a moment before responding. "I didn't think it was necessary. I'll be back in an hour." I didn't know why, but something about that response felt rehearsed. I tried to brush it off, but the seed of doubt had already been planted in my mind. When she finally returned, she acted as though nothing had happened. But I could tell, her eyes were different. There was something in the way she avoided my gaze that made my stomach twist. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The unease, the silence, the suspicion, everything had reached a boiling point. But what could I do? What was I supposed to say? I spent the next few days stewing in my own thoughts. I knew I needed to confront her, but how? How could I possibly bring up something so devastating without tearing apart everything we had built? It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one wrong move would send everything crashing down. And yet, I knew I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. The truth was out there, and it was time for me to find it. That night, I made a decision. The next time she stepped out, I would follow her. I had to know the truth, even if it meant facing something that might destroy me. The decision to follow her wasn't easy. It was a betrayal of trust, something I never thought I'd do. But there I was, standing at the door, watching as Amelia grabbed her coat and told me she was going out to meet a friend. This time, there was no hesitation in her voice, no pause to think of an excuse. It was as if she had done this 100 times before. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, as though everything was normal, while my heart pounded in my chest. She gave me a brief kiss on the cheek before walking out of the house, and for a split second, I almost called out to her. I almost stopped her, told her I was starting to feel uneasy, that something wasn't right. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and followed her, staying just far enough behind to not raise suspicion. I didn't know where she was going, but I followed her car through the quiet streets, weaving through corners and back roads. The city was alive with lights and sounds, but all I could hear was the thumping of my own heartbeat in my ears. What was I hoping to find? I wasn't sure. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not like this. But the question gnawed at me. What was she hiding? She drove for a while, much longer than I had expected, until finally, she pulled into a small, dimly lit parking lot behind a bar I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted into knots as she parked and got out, her heels clicking against the pavement. I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching her through the rearview mirror as she walked towards the entrance. But she wasn't alone. There was someone with her. A man. At first, I couldn't make out his face. He was standing at the door, waiting for her. They exchanged a few words, and then he pulled her into a hug. It wasn't the kind of casual hug you give a friend. It was longer, more intimate, as if they were more than just acquaintances. My blood went cold. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. I had to know who this was. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I waited, counting the seconds until I saw them walk into the bar together. My mind raced with questions. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? How could I not have seen it? I waited in the car for what felt like hours, but finally, I got out and walked toward the bar. I told myself it was just to find out where they were sitting, to get some kind of confirmation before I decided what to do next. But as I neared the entrance, I stopped dead in my tracks. There they were, Amelia and the man, laughing, talking, sitting too close to each other. It was obvious now. This wasn't a friendship. It was something far worse. They were involved. I could see it in the way they looked at each other, in the way their hands brushed when they reached for their drinks. I felt a wave of nausea hit me, and I quickly ducked behind a pillar, trying to control my breathing. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could this happen? How long had she been lying to me? The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life with, was sitting there, pretending everything was fine, while I was left in the dark. I could hear snippets of their conversation. They were talking about their plans for the weekend, the surprise they were going to take together. It wasn't the kind of talk you have with a casual friend. It was intimate, secretive, and it stung with every word I overheard. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to walk up to her, to look her in the eyes and demand answers. But I couldn't. I couldn't do it yet. Not here. Not like this. Instead, I stayed hidden in the shadows, my heart racing as I watched them talk, laugh, and share something that wasn't meant for me. The longer I stayed, the more everything around me seemed to fade into the background. I wasn't just watching my wife with another man. I was watching the life I thought I knew unravel. Eventually, they left the bar together, laughing as they walked out into the night. I didn't follow them this time. I couldn't. I was too numb, too shaken by what I had just witnessed. My mind was too full of questions and doubts. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? I drove home that night in a daze, not knowing what to think or feel. I wasn't sure if I wanted to confront her or run away and forget everything I had just seen. The truth was now out in the open, but it felt like the world had become a foreign place. What was I supposed to do now? How could I face her, knowing what I knew? And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to know the full truth anymore. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amelia and that man, laughing, so comfortable with each other. I could feel the weight of it pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I knew I couldn't just let this fester. The truth was out there, and I had to face it. The next day, Amelia came home late as usual. She walked through the door like nothing had changed, smiling and asking if I wanted to grab dinner. It was so normal, so painfully normal, that it almost made me sick. How could she stand there and pretend everything was fine? How could she look at me with those same eyes and act like I didn't know what she'd been up to? I couldn't take it anymore. "Amelia," I said, my voice sounding unfamiliar, like it didn't belong to me. "Who is he?" She froze, her hand halfway to the refrigerator. Her smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice too calm, too practiced. "The guy you've been seeing," I said, the words feeling like they were choking me. "The guy at the bar last night." Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny it, to lie to my face again. But she didn't. She just stood there, silent, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "You followed me?" she asked quietly, almost accusingly. I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. The truth was already out in the open. She dropped her gaze to the floor, biting her lip. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the guilt. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, or at least try to explain. But instead, she just shook her head. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she murmured. "Like what?" I asked, barely able to keep the anger from my voice. "You didn't want me to find out that you've been lying to me? That you've been with someone else?" She didn't answer. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said, the words coming out harsh, bitter. "I thought we had something real, but this is a joke." She took a step toward me, her eyes welling up with tears. "Nolan, please. Don't." I interrupted, my voice rising now. "Don't try to make this about us. This isn't about us anymore. You've made your choice, and now I have to make mine." I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. It was too much. The betrayal, the lies, it was all crashing down on me at once. I needed to get out of there, away from her, away from the life I thought we shared. I walked out the door, not knowing where I was going, but knowing I couldn't stay in that house another minute. The streets were quiet, the city lights flickering like distant stars as I walked aimlessly, my mind racing. How could I have been so blind? How long had this been going on? And more importantly, why had she done it? I didn't know the answers yet, but I was done asking questions. I wasn't going back to her. Not like this. The worst part? I wasn't sure if I ever would. I didn't go back that night. I couldn't. The thought of facing her again, of hearing her try to explain herself, made my stomach churn. Instead, I spent the night driving, no destination in mind, just moving. The streets blurred around me, and I barely noticed the time passing. The only thing that mattered was the overwhelming silence that filled the space where Amelia and I once were. By the time I returned home, the house felt like a ghost town. The lights were off, the air heavy with an eerie stillness. It should have been comforting, peaceful, even, but all I felt was a deep, gnawing emptiness. I had to face the fact that everything I knew, everything I had worked for, had been a lie. I didn't hear from Amelia the next day, and the silence that followed was deafening. She knew what had happened. She knew I had seen through the facade. I was waiting for her to reach out, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. But nothing came. Not a single word. It was as if she had disappeared. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alone. The house was too quiet, too empty. Every corner seemed to hold a memory, and each one cut deeper than the last. I found myself pacing around, unable to sit still, unable to process what had happened. I wanted answers, but she wasn't giving me any. She wasn't even trying. Days passed, and I found myself spiraling deeper into my thoughts. I replayed the conversation we had over and over in my head, each word, each moment. I could still hear the way she hesitated when I asked about the man, the way her eyes flickered with guilt. But it wasn't just her guilt that haunted me. It was the fact that she had been living a double life, one I hadn't even suspected. How long had it been going on? How could I have missed it? I went back to the bar where I had followed her. I stood across the street, staring at it, trying to make sense of what had happened. The thought of her there, laughing with him, made my skin crawl. What did she see in him? What did he give her that I couldn't? I was filled with questions, but no answers. I didn't want to talk to her anymore. I didn't even know what I would say. But I needed something, some sign that I wasn't just a fool. The silence between us stretched on. The weeks that followed were filled with an unbearable tension. I lived in the same house as Amelia, but she was a stranger to me now. We didn't speak. We didn't acknowledge each other's presence. It was as if we were both waiting for the other to make the first move, but neither of us had the courage. Then, one evening, nearly 3 weeks after everything had exploded, I got a text from her. One simple message. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to walk away completely. But another part of me, desperate for closure, for answers, couldn't resist. I agreed to meet her, though my hands shook as I typed the reply. Where? She suggested a quiet cafe, the kind of place we used to go to when things were good, when everything felt right. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her, but I couldn't back out now. I arrived early, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I didn't know what I expected from her, or what she would say, but I knew this conversation was inevitable. I just wasn't sure if I was strong enough for it. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The confident woman I had known was gone, replaced by someone more fragile, someone I wasn't sure I even wanted to know anymore. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and uncertainty, before sitting down across from me. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, until finally, she spoke. I never meant for any of this to happen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond immediately. I just watched her, waiting for the words that would explain everything. The words that would somehow make sense of all the lies, all the deception. But they didn't come. Instead, she just stared at me, waiting for me to say something, anything. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand she explain herself. But another part of me, the part one didn't want to acknowledge, still cared for her. Even after everything, even after the betrayal, I still cared. I don't know who you are anymore, I said, my voice shaky. The person I thought I married. I don't recognize her. She looked down, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. I'm sorry, she said softly. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. It just did. It wasn't the apology I had been hoping for. It wasn't enough to fix the broken pieces of us. But I wasn't sure there was anything she could say that would make it right. The truth was, I didn't know what to do now. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. And even more terrifying, I didn't know if I still wanted to. I was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. And as much as I wanted answers, the one thing I was certain of was this. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Not now. Not after everything. As the conversation continued, I realized something crucial. No matter what she said, no matter how sorry she was, things had changed. There was no going back. I never thought I'd be here, sitting across from her, trying to piece together a life that felt like it was shattering into 1,000 pieces. Amelia, the woman I had loved and trusted, now looked like a stranger to me. But as much as I hated the situation, I couldn't deny that a part of me still wanted answers. She sat there, quietly, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her coffee cup. Her eyes kept darting toward the door, as though she was waiting for an escape. I wanted to scream at her, demand the truth. But instead, I just stared at her, trying to figure out who she really was. "I didn't want this," she said again, her voice shaking slightly. "You have to believe me." I clenched my jaw. "Believe you? After everything? After what I saw?" She looked down at the table, avoiding my gaze. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I wasn't planning on falling for him." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had expected excuses, a tearful confession, but I wasn't ready for this. Falling for him? How many times had she been with him? How long had this been going on? "Who is he?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She hesitated, her eyes flickering nervously. "His name is Jake. We met through work. It wasn't supposed to get serious. It wasn't supposed to be like this." I felt my stomach tighten. Jake? I didn't know any Jake, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. This was real. The affair wasn't a one-time mistake. It had been ongoing. "I trusted you," I whispered, feeling the weight of those words settle heavily in my chest. "I thought we had something solid, something real." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, unable to bear her touch. "I know you feel betrayed. I can't undo what's happened, but I need you to understand, Nolan. It wasn't about you. It was about me. I've been lost for a while now." I looked at her, trying to process everything. The woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew, was sitting across from me, admitting she had been living a lie. She had fallen for someone else. And somehow, in that moment, I realized something even more painful than the affair itself. Amelia wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with. She wasn't even close. "You can't expect me to just forgive you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can't expect me to go back to the way things were, because I don't know who you are anymore. You're not the woman I married, and maybe I'm not the man you wanted." Her face crumpled, and for the first time in this entire mess, I saw true remorse in her eyes. But it didn't change anything. The damage had been done. As I stood up to leave, the silence between us felt heavier than ever. The woman I had known was gone, and in her place was a stranger, one I didn't know how to forgive, or if I even wanted to. I walked out of the cafe, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. There was no going back now. Everything had changed, and as much as I hated it, part of me knew this was the end of us. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake one thought. What if I wasn't the only one who had been lying? I spent the next few days in a haze. The days blurred into one another, filled with an unbearable weight that pressed down on me with every passing hour. I tried to keep my distance from Amelia, even though we were living under the same roof. We spoke only when necessary, if at all. But despite the space between us, something inside me was growing more restless. It wasn't just the betrayal that haunted me. No, it was the feeling that something else was wrong, something bigger that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then came the night I couldn't ignore it any longer. I was in our bedroom, sorting through some old boxes that had been pushed to the back of the closet. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to keep myself busy, trying to outrun the growing unease inside of me. But then, buried under a pile of old letters and photos, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. A small envelope. It wasn't one of the usual ones, the kind we used for bills or notes. This one was different, thicker, with a wax seal on it. At first, I thought it was just some random piece of junk mail, but as I flipped it over, something caught my eye. Her handwriting. Amelia's handwriting. I stared at it for a moment, the air thick with anticipation. Part of me told me not to open it, to leave it alone. But curiosity got the better of me. I tore the envelope open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. As I read the words on that page, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a letter from her to me. It was a letter to someone else. Someone I didn't know. The words on the page were full of affection, but there was no mention of me. No mention of our life together. Instead, she talked about us, her and Jake. She spoke about how they had been planning to leave together, to build a life somewhere else. They had been secretly talking about it for months. It wasn't just an affair. It was a plan, a future. I could feel the blood draining from my face as I read, my hands shaking with disbelief. The weight of what I was reading was suffocating. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about secrets, about a life I had never even been aware of. Amelia hadn't just been lying to me. She had been preparing to leave me for someone else. I stood there, frozen, staring at the letter. My mind was racing. I had been a fool, blind to the reality of what was happening in front of me. I had always thought I was the one who couldn't see, who couldn't face the truth. But now, it was all laid out in front of me, in black and white. She had been planning this, and I hadn't even known. I needed to confront her, to ask her about this letter, about Jake, about everything. But even as I picked up my phone to call her, a cold feeling washed over me. There was something else I hadn't noticed before, something that felt like a looming shadow. What if Amelia wasn't the only one hiding something? What if there was more to this than I had imagined? I couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that this wasn't just an affair. This was bigger than both of us. And if I was going to find the truth, I wasn't sure I could trust anyone, least of all Amelia. I took a deep breath and put my phone down. For the first time since all of this started, I felt a sense of fear that had nothing to do with losing Amelia. It was the fear that I didn't know the full story, that the truth I had been chasing might be something darker, something I wasn't ready to face. I spent the night sitting in the dim light of our bedroom, the letter from Amelia still clenched tightly in my hands. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what had happened, what was real, and what was just a web of lies. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the lies, the secret plans, felt like too much. But through it all, one thing kept nagging at me. I still had a choice. I didn't know what that choice was yet, but I knew I had to face Amelia. I had to hear it from her, the full truth, no matter how much it hurt. It wasn't about saving our marriage anymore. It was about finding peace, about understanding what had been lost, and maybe, somehow, finding a way forward. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen, making coffee, just like she always did. For a moment, she looked like the woman I remembered, the woman I had loved for so long. She smiled at me, but it was a hesitant smile, one that seemed to reflect her own uncertainty. I didn't waste time. I walked up to her, the letter still in my pocket, and looked her in the eyes. "Amelia," I said, my voice steady but calm. "We need to talk." Her face fell, the smile disappearing instantly. She knew what was coming. "I found the letter," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The one you wrote to Jake." For a long moment, there was silence. Her shoulders slumped as she looked down at the floor, the weight of what I'd said sinking in. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I never meant for it to get this far," she whispered. "I've been so lost, Nolan. I didn't know how to fix it, and I didn't know how to tell you. I've been holding on to this secret for so long, and it's been eating me alive. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I watched her, the woman I once knew so well, break down in front of me. Her tears were real, and I knew she was truly sorry for everything. But in that moment, I realized something important. She was human. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly leave my body. "I don't know what's going to happen next, Amelia," I said. "But I can't keep living like this. We can't keep pretending. I need honesty from you, and I need to know where we stand." She wiped her eyes, nodding. "I want to fix this. I do. But I can't ask you to just forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it." The room was filled with a heavy silence, but this time, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like the beginning of something real. The truth was out in the open. There was no more hiding, no more lies. But that didn't mean there wasn't a chance to rebuild. I thought about the years we had spent together, the good and the bad. I thought about the love we had shared, the memories that were still there, buried beneath all the hurt. And, in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't ready to let go. "We can't just go back to what it was," I said softly. "But we can start fresh. We can rebuild. It's going to take time, and it won't be easy, but I'm willing to try." Amelia looked at me, her eyes filled with hope and relief. "You really mean that?" I nodded. "I do. But we need to be honest with each other. No more secrets. No more pretending." She smiled through her tears. "No more pretending." And so, we began again. Not with the hope of magically fixing everything, but with the understanding that both of us were willing to try. We talked, we cried, and we began to rebuild trust. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I wanted to give up. But through it all, I realized something profound. Relationships aren't built on perfection. They're built on the willingness to grow, to forgive, and to move forward together. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we could.